The ocean kept its secret for centuries, until now. Some stories cling to the salt of the sea. You can hear them in the slow, aching creak of old wood, and in the restless whisper of the tide against the hull. They ride on the wind, carried from one distant shore to another, changing with every telling, yet always keeping their core of truth. There are tales the ocean keeps for itself, but sometimes it gives one back. November 1874. The merchant ship Aurora left the port of Halifax, her hull heavy with timber, wool, and barrels of preserved fruit. 23 souls sailed with her, men hardened by years at sea, and a captain whose eyes had weathered 1,000 storms. For the first few days, the voyage was peaceful. The sea lay flat and shining like a sheet of glass stretched to the horizon. Seabirds circled lazily overhead, their cries fading into the morning mist. Every timber of the ship seemed to hum with quiet confidence. The men worked in unhurried rhythm, their boots thudding softly on damp planks. And then, the world lost her. No wreckage, no signal, no survivors. Weeks later, on a grey and windless morning, a fisherman in a small dory hauled in his nets. They were heavy, tangled with seaweed and driftwood. And there, wrapped in oilcloth darkened by years in the deep, was a bundle the size of a man's head. Inside lay a weathered leather diary. Its pages, swollen and brittle with salt, still clung stubbornly to their words. They spoke of calm seas, of sudden storms, of fear, and of silence, of things no man should witness, and of a final night no man could survive. What follows are the last entries of the sailor who wrote them. November the 3rd, 1874. The morning was calm, almost unnaturally so. The kind of stillness that makes the sea look like polished glass, reflecting the pale light of a cold autumn sun. From the deck, the horizon was a perfect line, a thin seam between two endless blues. It was beautiful, and yet it made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. The air carried no wind, no gull's cry, only the soft creak of the rigging and the slow heartbeat of the hull against the waves. The crew moved lazily, speaking in low voices, as if they too felt the weight of the silence. I leaned against the bow rail, my fingers tracing the grooves worn deep into the wood by years of salt and storm. Out there, far in the hazy distance, I noticed a faint gray line. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a smudge in the sky no more than a passing cloud. But the captain had seen it too. He stood near the wheel, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on that thin shadow on the horizon. He didn't speak. Not to me. Not to anyone. Only the tightening of his jaw betrayed that he was thinking, calculating, remembering something. I wrote in my diary. The sea has moods, as any living thing does, and today it feels like she's holding her breath. We sailed on, hour after hour, but the gray line did not fade. It lingered, growing sharper with each passing mile, until it began to feel less like a cloud and more like a warning written across the sky. By nightfall, the men avoided looking at it. Superstition runs deep among sailors. We all knew, though none dared to say it aloud, that the calm never lasts. By midday, the change came. It began with the faintest touch, a whisper of wind brushing against the sails, so gentle it felt like the sea was exhaling. For hours, the air had been heavy and still. But now, something had shifted. At first, the crew welcomed it. Men loosened their collars, grateful for the cool breath against their sweat-damp skin. The captain gave a small nod, but he didn't take his eyes off the horizon. Within minutes, the Whisper became a push. The sails swelled, groaning as the rigging strained. Loose ropes began to dance across the deck, slapping against the wood with sharp, impatient cracks. Then came the shove. The wind rose without warning, its voice deepening from a murmur to a howl. The ship leaned hard to starboard, and boots thundered as the men scrambled to obey the captain's orders. "Lower them, all of them," he shouted, his voice cutting clean through the chaos. Hands worked furiously, fingers burning as they gripped the coarse hemp lines. Every knot fought back, swollen with salt and rain from voyages past. Above, the sails flapped like wounded wings before collapsing in heavy folds. The sky had begun to dim, as if the sun itself was retreating from what was to come. The horizon blurred into a single shade of gray. Sea and sky became one, and the line between them disappeared entirely. The air carried a strange taste, a mix of metal, brine, and something almost electric. Old sailors say the sea gives warnings before she strikes. Some are loud, some are quiet. This one was both. I felt it in my bones, in the tightening of my chest, in the way the crew avoided meeting one another's eyes. The wind had turned, and it was no longer our ally. Night did not fall gently. It came like a door slamming shut, dragging the storm down with it. The wind's voice became a scream, ripping through the rigging, turning every rope into a whip. The deck shuddered beneath my feet as waves began to slam against the hull, sending bursts of freezing seawater over the rails. Rain hammered down in sheets, each drop striking like a nail against skin. Visibility vanished, even the lanterns, shielded under their glass, flickered and dimmed, their light swallowed by the black around us. Men shouted orders into the gale, but the storm stole their voices before they reached their mark. We moved by instinct now, hands gripping the slick railings, bodies swaying with the lurch of the ship. Somewhere to my left, a crash, the sound of wood splintering. A boom swung loose, its heavy arc cutting through the air like a guillotine. It struck one of the crew squarely across the back, throwing him to the deck. Another man slipped on the streaming planks, his head striking hard against the side rail. Blood mixed with seawater, turning pink under the dim light. There was no time to help. The storm showed no mercy, and every second spent in one place was a second closer to going overboard. I had stitched my journal pages into the lining of my coat earlier that evening. Some part of me knew these words might outlive me. The ship groaned, a deep, wounded sound, as if its very bones were straining. Every creak felt like a warning, every shudder like a final breath. I wrote in my mind, even as my hands clung to the rail. Too many cries in the dark, too much fear to measure. The storm had broken, and it would not let us go. It happened just after midnight. The storm had been raging for hours, yet somehow, this was different. The wind, which had screamed without pause, suddenly dropped to a low, guttural moan. It was as if the sea itself had drawn in a deep breath. I looked out into the darkness. There was nothing to see, only the chaos of rain and spray. But then, between flashes of lightning, a shadow rose against the black sky. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but the shadow grew. and grew until I realized it was no shadow at all. It was a wall of water, taller than the masts, taller than anything I'd ever seen at sea. Its surface shimmered with white foam, like the teeth of some enormous beast. The crew froze. Even in the heart of a storm, we knew this was something else. This was the kind of wave that ended voyages and lives. The captain's voice cut through the night. "Brace!" One word, sharp as the crack of a whip. I grabbed the rail with both hands, my fingers locking into the wet wood. The ship began to climb, its bow lifting into the blackness. Water cascaded down the deck, slamming into my legs, pulling at me with the strength of a dozen men. For a heartbeat, we were weightless. Balanced on the crest, the world hung still. Then, the fall. The ship plunged down the far side, its bow burying into the sea below. The impact was like striking stone. Men were thrown from their feet. Barrels and crates broke free, smashing against the rails and each other. Somewhere, I heard the snap of timber. A mast, gone. The wave had taken it as easily as a child snapping a twig. As we rose again, I knew the sea had marked us. That wave was not just water, it was a message, and it said we would not see land again. Dawn came without light. The storm had burned itself out in the early hours, leaving behind a strange gray world. The sea was calm now, but not in the way it had been before. This calm felt hollow, empty. The deck was a ruin. Ropes hung in ragged strands, snapping weakly against the masts that still stood. One mast was gone entirely, its base splintered, its pieces drifting somewhere far astern. Crates had burst open, spilling their cargo across the planks. The smell of soaked wool and rotting fruit filled the air. Salt water pooled in the low places, reflecting the pale, sickly sky above. Of the crew, only 12 moved. The rest were gone. Some taken by the wave, some by the hours that followed. No one spoke their names. Not yet. It felt as though speaking them might draw the sea's attention back to us. I stood at the bow, looking out over the still water. It should have been beautiful, a mirror stretching to infinity. But all I saw was the color of ash. Even the gulls were gone. The captain moved among the survivors, checking wounds, speaking in a low voice I couldn't hear. When he reached me, he only placed a hand on my shoulder, then walked on. I understood. There were no words for this kind of mourning. I opened my diary, the pages warped but still holding ink. I wrote slowly, the pen scratching across the damp paper. The sea has taken what it wished. We are what remains, but I do not believe she is finished with us. As I closed the book, a faint sound reached my ears. Not wind, not wave. Something else. Far off, but moving closer. I told myself it was nothing, but in my bones, I knew. The silence would not last. The last night began quietly. The sky was clear, a strange gift after the storm. Stars shone cold and sharp above us, their light scattering across the black water. The sea was so still that every ripple felt deliberate, as if the ocean were choosing its movements with care. I sat in my cabin, a single lantern swaying from the beam overhead. The pages of this diary lay open before me, the ink drying slowly in the damp air. I could hear the faint murmur of the remaining crew above, boots thudding lightly on the deck, voices carrying just far enough to remind me I was not alone. But something was wrong. I felt it first in my chest, a tightening like the moment before a thunderclap. Then came the sound. It was faint at first, a low, rhythmic thump like oars striking water, too far to see, too close to ignore. The captain heard it too. He stood at the bow, peering into the dark, his knuckles white around the rail. When I joined him, he only shook his head, as if denying what he saw might make it vanish. Then, a light, small, flickering, moving slowly toward us across the water. It wasn't a lantern, I recognized. The flame seemed to pulse, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, as though it breathed. And with every pulse, the thumping grew louder. The captain ordered the crew below. I stayed. I had to see. The light came closer, close enough now that I could make out a shape, long and narrow, low in the water. No sail, no flag, no voice, just the light and the sound. I returned to my cabin and wrote these words. If anyone finds this, know that we sailed into the dark and that something sailed back to meet us. The ink was still wet when the lantern went out.